Right, it's my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker, who is Geraint Evans from Swansea University. Geraint is Senior Lecturer in English at Swansea University, and he's published a lot on 20th century Welsh literature and Welsh writing in English, and also on Welsh book history. So Geraint and I together co-authored the chapter on Wales for David's book, and Geraint is going to give a sort of taste of that chapter in his presentation today, called From the Gododdin to In Parenthesis, Is There a Welsh National Epic? Thank you.
Thank you, Helen and David, and it's great to be here with members of both these great projects. So much of what David said applies to what we've written about Wales for this project, and also the experience of learning from doing a big project, that our sense of when Helen and I designed and co-edited the Cambridge History of Welsh Literature, the afterword, which we wrote in a day at the very end, was in a sense the most, for us, revealing aspect of the whole project, and revealed to us things that we hadn't realized for 30, 40 years of thinking about this stuff. So those ideas inevitably inform some of what we wrote about this. If one of the functions of epic is to commemorate moments of significant historical change long after the event, then Wales, like other nations, has produced many such texts, both in verse and in prose, but none of these declares itself to be an epic. There is no native term in Welsh for epic. We have the form epig, which is a 20th century borrowing, cerdd arwrol and cerdd hanesol from the 18th and 19th century, both antiquarian coinages. To claim for Wales an epic, we need to explore form, audience, and afterlife, crucially. Epic not only commemorates, it also dramatizes the past for a specific audience, bringing that audience into being through an appeal to shared values and aspirations. The concept of nation is similarly problematical for Wales, which is not and never has been a nation state. When the territorial regions of Western Britain were named Wales by the Anglo-Saxon settler invaders of the 6th century, the land and its princely rulers were marked permanently as subordinate to the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, because, as many of you will know, the word Wales is itself English, derived from the Old English Wealas, meaning foreigner. That is, in the sense of people who were once part of the Roman Empire. A few of the Welsh princes in the Middle Ages attempted to unify the north and south of the country, the most successful being Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, the last independent Prince of Wales, who died in battle against the English in 1282. When the armies of Edward I defeated the Welsh people, they disinherited the Welsh princes, appropriated their lands as possessions of the English crown. Since the time of the Act of Union then in 1536 and 1543, by which Wales was formally annexed to the Kingdom of England, a very early example of legal colonisation, the constitutional status of Wales as a part of the larger Kingdom of England, later Great Britain, later still the United Kingdom, has not changed. Political devolution, voted for in 97 and achieved in 99, brought an element of self-government, but Wales, like Scotland, remains a sub-state nation within a larger nation-state. In medieval Wales, however, despite the lack of constitutional autonomy, the written evidence draws the Welsh people together as a cenedl, or nation, a people who are united by their shared history and language. It is at the site of struggle between the sub-state and the nation-state that the concept of Welsh epic emerges, because most medieval Welsh storytellers and poets, and there is a huge amount of surviving manuscript material from Wales, as many of you will know, most of it recounts the story of the epic struggle of the Welsh against English power. The single narrative underlying much of medieval Welsh literature is a narrative that seeps later into modern Welsh and Welsh writing in English and it is one of English treachery, of a land grab of the once independent Britain. According to this narrative, the Welsh are the descendants of the British people whose patria was stolen by the incoming Saxons. So some of the possible national epics for Wales. There are a number of texts we discuss in the chapter, but two stand out as fulfilling our criteria for what we might think of as a Welsh national epic. Firstly, at the top, the group of heroic elegies ascribed to Aneirin and known as a Gododdin, and the group of prose tales known collectively since the 19th century as the Mabinogion. The themes of Welsh nationhood, leadership, pan-British and wider allegiances, and the outrage of Saxon incursion are all expressed in the long stanzaic poem known as a Gododdin. Taken as a complete work comprising a series of heroic elegies to individual British heroes, the poem celebrates the men of Gododdin, an old British kingdom centred around modern-day Edinburgh in sub-Roman Britain. The poem laments the crushing defeat of the British at the Battle of Catraeth in present-day North Yorkshire against the Angles of Bernicia and Deira around the year 600. A Gododdin contains many of the themes and tropes of classical epic, such as the noble but doomed heroes who display virtues of martial boldness, generosity, recklessness with their lives, and also the eyewitness narrator, who claims to be one of the very few survivors of the Battle of Catraeth. Most of the stanzas are elegiac commemorations of a single warrior or a small group of warriors, emphasizing the imperative of individual sacrifice for a greater cause. Just as the ancient heroes of Homer and Virgil are identified in nationalist and ethnic terms, so the poet of a Gododdin categorizes these warriors explicitly as British. Three rulers of men who came from the Britons, Cynri and Cynon, Cynrain of Eiron, the wily tribes of Daver would ask, has there come from the Britons a man better than Cynon, foe-stabbing serpent? So these lines and many in the poem suggest a self-conscious antiquarianism, a deliberate invocation of the heroes of a Britain long gone, yet still occupying a crucial place in what we might think of as the national memory. The long roll call of fallen heroes adds up to more than a post-battle panegyric for the dead. It amounts to a historicised and epic account of the heroic defeat of a nation. The second group of texts we've picked out is medieval Welsh texts, which perhaps most closely conform to our ideas of a national epic for Wales. And these are the 11 prose tales grouped together under the modern title, the Mabinogion. Since Lady Charlotte Guest published these 11 tales together in Welsh and in English in the mid-19th century, there have been many scholarly editions and translations and anthologies of some or all of these tales. The name recognition of Mabinogion remains high as a term indelibly associated with Wales and its national culture, resulting in the Mabinogion's stable position in educational curricula and numerous modern remediations in novels, plays, films and animations. So briefly, these are the Pedair Cainc Mabinogi, the four branches, which are all related. Pwyll Pendefig Dyfed, Branwen Ferch Llyr, Manawydan Fab Llyr, and Math Fab Mathonwy. And the 7 other tales, Culhwch ac Olwen, Breuddwyd Maxen, Cyfraint Llydd a Llefelys, Breuddwyd Rhanabwy, Geraint Fab Erbyn, Owain, or Iarlles y Ffynnon, and Peredur, character based loosely on the French Grail hero. And in these, Culhwch is the oldest and Peredur is one of the later ones. The main sources are 2 major manuscript collections, Llyfr Coch Hergest, now in Jesus College, and Llyfr Gwyn Rhydderch in the National Library of Wales. The 4 branches conform perhaps closest to our criteria of a national epic, especially in having a long afterlife. And part of the reason for this is that they construct, often obliquely, a sense of national identity in the face of an external threat, in this case, the ghostly presence of the Normans. And that sense of an implicit, sometimes explicit, claim to sovereignty over the island of Britain. We next look at the figure of Arthur in Culhwch ac Olwen and a number of the other romances. Many of these tales deal with magic, death, power struggles, military campaigns, and in many of them, Arthur or another British king is sovereign of the whole island of Britain. As Mark Williams has recently argued, Arthur is the only figure from Celtic legend and mythology in any of the Celtic languages who has true international recognition today. But with that literary fame also comes appropriation. So Arthur has been, as many of you know, appropriated as a warrior hero by many of the literatures of Western Europe. In the Welsh tales, Arthur is a British king in an island where the Saxons barely exist, except as churls encountered by Manawydan, the British king, and where the Normans have not even arrived. Whenever the tales were first composed, their antiquarian intention, even at that date, is clear. They're designed to commemorate the Welsh as part of an ancient British kingdom, which stands alongside Rome and France and Brittany, and implicitly argues that their history can only be understood in that context. So moving into more of the reception of some of these tales in modern times. In his role as the oracular patriarch of English literary modernism, Ezra Pound provocatively claimed that an epic is simply a poem containing history, a formulation which we noticed was surprisingly close to the 18th century Welsh antiquarian phrase, cerdd hanesol. But beyond this idea of a poem containing history, another of our criteria for a Welsh national epic must be that it was a text with a long afterlife. The Gododdin is one that we looked at that I mentioned earlier, found in only a single manuscript, like the text of the Old English epic Beowulf. This poem's tenuous survival became an important symbol. The poignancy of the idea in the poem itself is not hard to grasp. The warband has been completely destroyed apart from a handful of witnesses. In one version, a single witness who returns as a soldier poet to tell the tale and commemorate fallen comrades. This is an epic poem about survival where the poetic language of the narrator becomes a metonym for the tenacious survival of the Welsh language itself. 10 stanzas from Gododdin were first printed in 1764, and since that date there have been more than 20 published editions and translations. However, the most significant of these, I argue in this chapter, oh, sorry, this was a little bit from the opening of Pwyll Pendefig Dyfed from the Red Book. Pwyll Pendefig Dyfed, oedd yn arglwydd ar 700 Dyfed. That has the kind of afterlife of being taught in schools and universities right through the 20th and 21st century. But the most important edition of the Gododdin, we argue in this chapter, or I argue in this chapter, is this one, by Ifor Williams, 1938, the first scholarly edition. And you can't quite see at the top, this is from the manuscript, Hwn yw y Gododdin a Neirin a'i cant. This is the Gododdin, a Neirin sang it. This established for the first time, but for a small scholarly Welsh-speaking readership, a reliable edition of this archaic and problematic text. In his introduction, Ifor Williams outlines a reading position. And this is an idea that gripped the imagination of the political and cultural nationalists who were agitating for independence. Perthyn diddordeb anarferol I lyfr Aneirin, a llawysgrif lle cafwyd yr holl ganu sydd yn y gyfrol hon. It's hard to emphasize This is such beautiful Welsh prose. It's like a poem in itself. Bechanw, it's small. And then he has the old-fashioned, the modern sort of numbers, 38 pages. But then he goes back to the older counting system. Ar ei hugain na min un o ddelen memro. On its 20 missing one, vellum leaves. It captures, and the word it uses, trysorwyr, the verb trysor, treasured for our nation and the world, was this very, very old poem. So this reads like a manifesto of cultural nationalism, incorporating the echoes of a political sovereignty assumed by Aneurin and his 6th century contemporary Taliesin, which reaches back to the post-Roman period. The poem came to occupy a special place in modern Wales, representing the fragility of transmission of the real treasure, of which these poems became a metonymy. That treasure is Cerdd Dafod y Cymru, the poetic language of Wales. So then we also look at the Arthurian material from this and from the Mabinogion, and I'll just go quickly through this because time is getting on. David Jones, major figure, writer, painter. He writes one of the most important books in English about the Great War in Europe, 1914-18. And each section of the 7 sections has a line from a Gododdin as an epigram. Also as a subtitle, Se niesit ei gleddyf yn pen mamau. His sword rang in the heads of mothers. This is the frontispiece that he made himself for the book, and here's the original that's now in the National Library of Wales. This wonderful modernist painting. He was also a painter, and he developed a style of writing later that he called painted inscriptions. This is one of the famous ones. Carawaliad derwyddau. Dydd Gwyl dy Masi o Sba, but unfed dydd ar ddeg o fis Rhagfyr Dyw Gwener. The feast day of Pope Damasus, the 11th of December, Friday. And then a line from the Old Welsh Brut, ac yna bwriwyd o'r Cymru i'r llawr, and then all of Wales was cast down. And this is Pen Llywelyn Dig, the head of Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, the last independent Prince of Wales. So this is the 11th of December, 1282. In some ways, what Jones and others argued was the end of Welsh independence. And I recently saw for the first time a most wonderful version of this, which was auctioned at Bonhams with a group of David Jones letters. This was only last year. Oh. Absolutely wonderful. Sent to Valerie Williams, also on the 11th of December, because he's commemorating the day. And in this version, there's no Latin. It's all Welsh. So where he has Carawaliad derwyddau, there's the walia, by the way, the Wales word, the Wales that borrowed into Latin as well. He has here in Welsh, Gwyddïa dros Cymru, pray for Wales. And he, instead of the bits of Latin that are further down, he puts in just Welsh. One other idea we talk about in the chapter is the idea of the square mile, which is a really important idea in modern Welsh political thought. It comes from a book called Hi and Fan by D.J. Williams, who argues that the small piece of rural Carmarthenshire where he grew up until the age of 6 is where he grew to love the countryside and Welsh-speaking Wales, and that his later nationalism was just an abstract expression of that primary experience. And this becomes a really important idea. Saunders Lewis, one of the co-founders of the Welsh National Party, repeats this idea in a series of political essays in the 30s, which is collected and reprinted in a book called Canlyn Arthur, Following Arthur. So the whole thing keeps coming back to that sense of we're a nation defined by language and culture and poetry who were here when the Romans arrived and who are still here. And I think there's a bit that I I've left out of this version, but in a letter from David Jones to Saunders Lewis, he says something like, we are the only people who were here when the Romans arrived and are still here. We are the heirs of Romanity, which I think is the most wonderful phrase. That sense of being part of a global continuum of culture, overwhelmed by Saxon invasion, from which we might emerge again. The antiquarian use of the ancient British past for political purposes is visible not only in literary texts, but as you would hope and expect in Welsh popular culture of the late 20th century. 20 of the asterisk stories have been, 18 of the asterisk stories have been translated into Welsh by Alan Kerry Jones. This was the first, Asterix the Gaul, and this is Asterix Caesar's soldier. And it seems to me that one of the reasons that it was so successful, apart from the fact that they're very funny books and beautifully drawn, is that it's set in Gaul around the year 50 BCE, a time when the island of Britain itself was its own Celtic-speaking world, and one which, by analogy with Asterix, stands ready to resist an invasion by Rome, as if. So that sense of heroic defeat, knowing that, well, you've got no chance, but come on, guys, you know, we're up to this. It's all there in the Asterix story, which goes down very well in Wales. Popular music also made use of the classical and medieval past to reimagine a Welsh-speaking nation which has withstood the challenge of Roman, Saxon, Norman, and English invaders. And this is a well-known folk singer called David Iwan. I couldn't help noticing there is a similarity with Asterix, as depicted here. And in a popular reflex of the story of Breuddwyd Maxen, the dream of Maxen Wledig, David Iwan wrote a folk anthem in the 1980s called Yma o Hyd, Still Here. The song recalls how Magnus Maximus, Maxen Wledig in the Welsh tradition, left Wales and the island of Britain in 383 to become emperor in Rome, thereby leaving his mark on European history and providing a convenient date for the birth of the Welsh nation. With a serious purpose that makes use of comic anachronism, as in Breuddwyd Maxen itself, the song says that when Magnus Maximus left Wales in 383, he left behind a cenedl gyfan, a complete nation. It's the most comically, anachronistically ridiculous idea that there was a complete Welsh nation in 383. But then it says, that was then, and there's a call and response element in the song. He says, a heddiw lle ni, where are we? And the answer comes back, we're still here. We're still here. And that's the chorus. That song became so popular in Wales in the 21st century that it was adopted as an official anthem by the Welsh soccer team. And briefly in January 2020, a new recording of the song reached #1 in the iTunes download chart for the whole of the UK. So after this concluding paragraph, I'll play a little bit of that song. So to conclude, what's interesting about the national epics of Wales, and we've been suggesting that the two obvious candidates are the poems of the Gododdin and the prose tales of the Mabinogion, is that they took shape in the early Middle Ages and have remained salient into the modern period. These early literary texts in Welsh provide an unbroken linguistic link to the almost unimaginably remote past of post-Roman Britain, thus lending antiquity to the Welsh myth of political sovereignty. While the figure of Arthur has been appropriated into the literary mythologies of several other European nations, the four branches of the Mabinogi, the prophetic dream of Maxen Wledig, and the beautiful heroic elegies by Aneurin are unique to Wales, a nation that has defined itself through language and culture, and which continues to redefine its identity in terms of political struggle and of heroic survival against the odds. Thank you.